Okay, thank you so much everyone for attending. Let's get started with today's presentation. Slide 2, please. So welcome to our 6th and final Regional Plan Review virtual Q&A on long-term planning and the regional plan. My name is Kathleen Frelick and I'll be moderating today's session. I'd like to inform our attendees that this event is being recorded and we will be posting it on the project website, which is www.shapeyourcityhalifax.ca/regional-plan. Slide 3, please. Before we begin, I'd like to give everyone some quick instructions for using Microsoft Teams. First of all, if you would like to use closed captioning for today's session, please click the CC button in the lower right corner of the screen. Slide 4, please. You may leave the session at any time by clicking the Leave button on the upper right corner of the screen. The link to this session will remain active throughout the event, so you can return whenever you would like. Slide 5, please. The main goal of this event is to answer your questions and gather feedback. You can submit questions and comments throughout the session using the chat screen on the right of the presentation by clicking Ask a Question. Slide 6, please. The minutes from this session will form the public record, and you are welcome to include your name with your question or comment if you would like, but you may also post anonymously by clicking Post as Anonymous. Next slide, please. After that, you just type your question in where it says ask a question, and we will be directing your question to our panel of contributors. Slide 8, please. So today, staff will be providing a quick presentation, and then our team of HRM staff who have contributed to this section will be available to answer your questions. In addition to this session, we invite everyone to visit the project website to participate in our other engagement tools, including our survey, or submit comments and questions via email or by phone. We will be gathering public feedback until July 16th. Slide 9, please. So I'm going to turn things over to Kate Green, who is our program manager for regional planning, to give a quick presentation. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kathleen. Next slide, please. So we are here today because we are reviewing the regional plan, which means we're evaluating our land use policies and making sure that they represent the direction that council would like to take. We are contemplating how the municipality is physically organized and growing, and we kicked off this phase of public engagement on May 20th at Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee, which is the primary advisory body for this work. This evening's session is focused on long-range planning and is our last webinar for the week. Next slide, please. Just to take a quick step back and make sure everyone here understands the regional plan, it's really a strategic document. It's the first planning document adopted after amalgamation that provided a region-wide vision for land use. It was first adopted in 2006 and provided a comprehensive outline of how growth and development should take place until the year 2031. Next slide, please. This image presents the progression of the regional plan over the past 15 years. In 2006, we approved the original regional plan, and in 2014, we conducted our first review. You might recognize the name RP+5, which was the brand for that review. You can see we are aiming to complete this is our second review in 2022, and the end of the plan horizon again is 2031. Next slide, please. The regional plan is powerful in guiding the municipality's planning and decision-making. As a high-level policy document, it does a few different things. First, the plan provides policy direction for planning at the regional and community level. The regional plan sits above the community or secondary plan level documents and above our land use bylaws and sets region-wide policy intent. Where something is important enough that it should apply everywhere, the regional plan policy can set up land use bylaw regulations that will be applied region-wide. This has been done for many of our environmental regulations. So for example, for setbacks from water courses, those policies sit in the regional plan and the regulations are rolled out in every community's land use bylaw. The regional plan can also establish the municipality's intent to do future research programs or studies. For example, in 2006, the regional plan called for a series of transportation priorities plans, including a road network plan. This ultimately became the integrated mobility plan. And finally, the regional plan identifies where there are needs for different types of programming or opportunities to partner with community or other levels of government. Our mobility network is managed by different levels of government and can be supported through partnerships with other groups across our community. Similarly, the regional plan supports different programming and community-based services in rural areas. Next slide, please. There are a few key questions we're trying to answer through the review. The first is, how do we locate housing and employment in smart strategic locations so that growth can happen easily and in a way that furthers the municipality's most important goals? We can break this down into two key questions. First, how are we growing? We need to evaluate the projected demand for housing and employment today and into the future. To do this, we rely on two key pieces of information, our housing and population analysis and our industrial and employment land analysis. Next slide, please. Another question we ask is, where should we grow? Once we know how much we are going to grow, we begin to assess where new housing and jobs can be accommodated. It isn't only about where there are pieces of land that can be developed, but where that land is located as it relates to the location of services and infrastructure. We think about how and where we can infill or where we should expand the city into greenfield areas. This is done with careful consideration as to how development can be serviced with water, sewer, transit, recreation, and studying how we should be preserving or protecting important pieces of ecological or cultural land. And as Regional Council has identified aspirations for a sustainable future, such as the Integrated Mobility Plan's mode share targets and the emission reduction targets in Halifax, we can update our modeling and assess how different land use growth scenarios might interact with these long-term objectives. Next slide, please. As we define growth, how growth should be best located amongst various communities, we can also assess how that development should be organized to enable sustainable, people-oriented design. We can break the community scale work down into two key questions. Next slide, please. How should our communities change as we grow? So we can define our vision for how new growth should occur, especially in the suburban and rural areas of our municipality. We can set out community design objectives and start to envision where our centers, corridors, and important places are and what they should become in the future. We can also assess how we'll organize brand new communities. Places we are going to expand the service boundary are usually greenfield areas without significant amounts of existing development. And as we build these brand new communities, we need to consider how the development can be organized to protect ecological and cultural resources, as well as how regional infrastructure should be upgraded to accommodate this growth. Next slide, please. So the theme and direction document, which is our first major deliverable in the plan review, it includes focus on 11 themes. And an overview of each theme is available to you on our website, which is shapeyourcityhalifax.ca/regional-plan. But today we'll be focusing in on content from theme 10 and 11, imagining HRM into 2050 and beyond, and assessing the impacts of COVID-19. I like this quote. Danish architect and urban design consultant who is based in Copenhagen, Jan Gehl, has focused his career on improving the quality of urban life by reorienting city design towards the pedestrian and cyclist. He states, "We formed the cities, but then the cities formed us." Every action that we take in a city has a reaction and impact, and sometimes these are major paradigm shifts. Sometimes they're systemic, widespread, and rooted in culture. And these affect all aspects of our life and how our cities have been built and how we've planned for them. Next slide, please. I'll start again because I forgot to say next slide. Just turning back, I like this quote by Danish architect and urban design consultant Jan Gehl. He says, "We formed the cities, but then the cities formed us." So every action we take when we're building a city has a reaction and impact, and sometimes these are major paradigm shifts. Sometimes these decisions are systemic, they're widespread, and they're rooted in culture, and they affect all aspects of our life and how our cities have been built and how we plan for them. Modern planning was invented in response to inhumane living conditions in the 19th century, and we tried to manage uses in such a way that we created healthier cities where noxious uses were separated from places where people wanted to live and recreate. Although this created many benefits at the time, the idea that uses should be separated, for example, separating residential uses from commercial, has affected our communities over time. As technology has improved and as we've learned more about the impacts of a car-oriented culture, we are now working on integrating uses and becoming less concerned with use separation. Planning is often thinking about taking action and building community, thinking about impacts and mitigating these impacts. But it can also be about driving towards outcomes and thinking about what we want to achieve and creating rules that can respond to this or ideas that can respond to this. But exactly what are we trying to create and what is the community that we're trying to build? Where are the ideas that we have for our community and where we need to go? Where do they come from? Ultimately, they come from a conversation that we host with community and ideas that we all have about thinking about long-range planning for our communities. Next slide, please. Sometimes we look backwards to understand where we need to go. So here you can see a series of slides that reflect how our community has developed over time and where it has developed. So moving ahead through these slides, you can see that originally we had a compact metro area. It was surrounded by rural landscape and seashore, and now almost twice as many people live in suburban communities in the rural commuter shed. Keep moving the slides ahead. Ultimately, as we've grown, we've started to increase our development along roadways, along major transportation routes. But if we continue to grow outwards across the municipality, that will really impact our environmental footprint and how far out into our municipality we spread. The regional plan has tried to concentrate development in and around the core and prevent that widespread consumption of land. And that's a real focus of how we are trying to organize the municipality right now. Next slide, please. The other big thing at play for us is that we're within a province and we are continually growing, and a lot of people from within the province are migrating to our center. So while our planning frameworks tend to look inward because they're based on our traditional political boundaries, we really need to start to think and look more closely at our role within the region, and in particular, how we connect with the hour commute around Halifax. The region we are trying to build may even extend beyond our borders. So how do we engage in conversations with the province and our partners to ensure the long term of our province? Next slide, please. So as we know, our ideas about what the future may look like change drastically, even over a few decades. Factors such as immigration, climate change, social movements, pandemics, all have an impact on how we plan our communities. The regional priorities plans that were initiated through the 2014 Regional Plan Review have started to focus on long-range planning by creating work and policies that tackle climate change, protecting and connecting open spaces, nurturing our culture and heritage, and connecting our communities through a variety of means, such as automobile, transit, and active transportation. But this plan is starting to near the end of its lifespan. Our population growth has doubled since the last plan review, and it's time to begin thinking about what we want HRM to look like further into the future, as far ahead as 2050. And as the year 2020 taught us, society can change dramatically over a short time. Our planning asks us how the municipality can be better prepared to handle a certain uncertain future, and to some extent, even direct what the future can look like based on a shared vision. Next slide, please. Some of thinking about the future involves adjusting our thinking. We know we need to accept uncertainty, accept system level disruption. We need to bring different traits to the table than maybe we do in standard planning, such as being flexible, adaptive, and courageous. And again, next slide, please. And again, nothing has impacted us more than the simple example of COVID-19, the elephant in the room. COVID-19 has seen a major shift to how and where people work, which could significantly impact employment areas and change commuting patterns. There has been an increased demand in the housing market for larger homes with private backyards, where people have extra space to work from home. The regional plan review will continue, and our team will continue to monitor trends in working from home, housing form preferences, where people choose to live, and commercial and office vacancy rates. And we will be aiming to develop more flexible land use policy and regulations that can adapt to changing conditions. So we're considering that aspects of society will shift and that indicators of societal change can include how and where we work, attend school, our comfort levels around gatherings, housing form preferences, whether or not we will change how we move, and also the importance of outdoor and public space and active transportation networks. These are all things we're actively talking about now. Next slide, please. Another lens that we're really using to think about long-range planning is a health lens. Health is a great way to think about community and really understand unintended consequences that can result from such system-level changes. So, the modes of transportation used by citizens, the frequency with which they engage in physical activity for recreational or utilitarian purposes, vehicle-related injuries, local and regional air quality, access to consumption of healthy and unhealthy foods, social interactions, mental health, and economic opportunities. All of these can be viewed using a health lens, which really help us in thinking about how we're designing for people, not just for buildings or for physical infrastructure, but how we're actually relating that built form to people. Next slide, please. Another idea that we're thinking about is the idea of scenario planning. A lot of our current regional strategies are premised on the idea that the future looks a lot like the past. So recognizing that the future is always uncertain, we want to begin working with citizens to imagine different futures. So scenarios considering what the year 2050 and beyond may look like. In scenario planning, stories are crafted to represent a range of potential but realistic futures that could come about because of forces beyond our control. Broadly defined, external forces are trends and disruptors that could impact the future of the region in significant ways, change the availability and ways in which land might be used, affect the ways that people travel and simply live everyday life. Based on these scenarios, we can then determine what policies and work should be prioritized. I also have the sense that we're in a place in our growth in Halifax that we need to leapfrog. I look at the ambitious challenge Halifax 2050 has set out, our climate change action plan, and also the investment required to deliver on that and our mobility goals and aspirations through the integrated mobility plan. And I really think we need to work together to make smart decisions to quickly accommodate our growth and also create momentous change toward these goals. Next slide, please. So these are just a few of the ideas that are shaping our ideas about long-range planning. And really, we're at a point where we want to speak with citizens to understand what it is that they think is important in thinking about future states, how we might think about the future, and how we might better organize our land use policies to respond to different futures. I also like to ground this kind of thinking, and I've placed another quote from Jan Gehl here. So fantastic to be a citizen of a city where every morning for 50 years we've woken up and we've realized today the city is a little bit better than yesterday. So while at the same time as there can be tremendous societal change through something like COVID-19, at the same time, it takes time to really grow and change a city, and incremental changes are also very important. So we need to continue to evolve our thinking and build our skills and talk with citizens about what we think the future will be like. And I guess in addition to receiving questions and answers from the audience today, we also want to ask, what do you think the next big paradigm shift will be? And what are the most important issues that we need to pay attention to? Next slide, please.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. Oh, sorry. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback, I think. Thank you. So as we mentioned, everyone is welcome to submit questions using the chat function to the right of the presentation screen. Just hit ask a question. Next slide, please. While everyone is submitting questions, we will be reading them in the order that they are received and direct them to our panel. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly introduce our panelists for today. With us today, we have Tanya Davis, who is the Program Manager for Transportation Planning at HRM. Shannon Miedema, who is our Program Manager for Energy and Environment. Leah Perrin, who is a Principal Planner with Regional Planning. And Kate Green, who just gave the wonderful presentation, who is the Program Manager with Regional Policy. Next slide, please. So while we wait for some questions to come in, I think I'll just start by kicking it off with a pretty general one for the entire panel. I'm just wondering, in terms of, related to the work that you do, what you see sort of as the biggest opportunities and issues that are coming forward in HRM.
Hey there, I can start. So again, Tanya Davis with Transportation Planning with the Halifax Regional Municipality. So I think as our municipality grows and grows really significantly over the next number of years, I think our job will be to look at the different advancing technologies, like artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles, as well as really diving into the societal changes that we need to focus on. Like where people want to live and where they will work and how they want to work, as well as, thinking about our infrastructure to make sure that we're building it sustainably, as well as that it's inclusive and accessible for those that use it. So really focus on those things.
I can jump in as well. Shannon Miedema with Energy and Environment. So a lot of what we're doing right now is focusing on our climate plan, Halifax, which is a 30-year plan that goes out to 2050. And as part of all the work that we did to develop that, we're coming up on its first anniversary next week. We imagined different scenarios, future scenarios, based on our level of action and ambition and the targets we wanted to achieve. And so for us, we think a lot about what Halifax is going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 30 years, in 100 years from a climate perspective based on what we're doing. And so there's a lot of interconnected pieces with planning and with transportation, but there's a lot of opportunity to plan our future growth in a way that really aligns with our climate goals. So looking at hubs of areas where we live, work, and play that have district energy systems that allow for energy to be provided to a whole bunch of different buildings that with less greenhouse gas emissions and at a lower cost and with more resiliency to weather impacts and things like that. That's something that we really want to be looking to encourage going forward, and to really be very protective of the areas we know we need to maintain for things like corridors and other natural spaces for other animals and plants that require it for their habitats as part of our green network plan. And so, yeah, we have we're future thinking kind of all the time with our climate plan. So I would encourage anyone listening, if you have questions focused on the climate side of things, to post them. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I better add my 2 cents. Certainly from a regional planning perspective, one of the biggest shifts I think for us in this regional plan review is coming to terms with how much our growth rate has changed since we last did this plan review in 2014. So the original regional plan in 2006 and then again in 2014, we weren't seeing a lot of growth in HRM. The 2014 plan is based on a foundation of 1% growth year over year. And our growth rate since 2016 has been about 2%. So that's double, and that's huge for how we provide services, how we provide housing, really how we service our population in the city. So, and I'm really interested in making those connections. It's great to hear Shannon and Tanya kind of talk about the connections between all of our different departments. One thing I'm really interested in keeping tabs on and tracking over time is, how we may see more immigration over time as a result of climate change in other parts of the world. We know that some of the most populated places in the world are also some of the most climate vulnerable. So we have lots of opportunity in Canada to take on climate refugees. That's something that's really interesting to me, and I am looking forward to see how we can rise to the challenge. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So our first question, I think I'm going to direct over to our planning team, although we may need to follow up with some additional information on this one. It's, will the Port of Halifax need to or be able to move out of the Fairview and South End terminals given the limited amount of space and the housing development pressure?
Thanks, Kathleen. I can take a stab at that if someone else wants to help as well. I think the answer to that is, I mean, the port is certainly managed, owned, and operated by our federal government. It's a higher level of government than us, but it's a great example of a place where we need to work with other levels of government and partner with other organizations to understand their plans. So, you know, we would be in sort of regular conversations with the federal government, with the port, to understand how they're planning and make sure that our planning is aligned. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add, but that's where we're at.
Just from a climate perspective, we've been in conversations with the port because there's some conversations happening across Canada about hydrogen and hydrogen hubs, green hydrogen hubs, and the ports are really well positioned to move hydrogen forward and kind of be distributors of green hydrogen. And so the port here in Halifax is excited about this idea, and we've been exploring it. So I don't know so much about like the locations of things and if they're going to move, but I do know that they are part of our stakeholder network for the climate plan, which is great to see.
Great, thanks so much, Leah and Shannon. The next question I think is for Tanya. Should current and near-term future development have designated space for regional light rail?
Thanks for the question. Really appreciate that. So I think as we go through the process of, you know, looking at our strategic corridors and seeing where development's going to go, and from our bus rapid transit system and all the pieces that go into that, you know, the consideration for future proofing those functional plans and that layout will be really important for the consideration for light rail. So that is definitely on our radar to think about it. I don't think light rail is a short-term goal, but it's certainly something that we're keeping forward for a long-term goal.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tanya. So I have just, we've reached our last question that we've received from the public at this time. Please feel free to submit any other questions you may have. But for our last question as of right now, I'll send it over to Kate. How are you coordinating regional growth with Hants County given its ex-urban population growth?
Hi, thanks for that, Kathleen. So as I mentioned during the presentation, one of the we are very inward focused in how we do our planning because our political boundaries, you know, direct us to really only administer land use over the lands that we have responsibility for. But I think it's important for us to expand our scope a little wider and start to speak with some of our adjacent municipalities. So Hants would certainly be one of those municipalities. We're actually required to consult with other municipalities through this process, so that will be part of what we do. But we also want to brainstorm more with them and some of the partners that we have within an hour of Halifax around what they think the big trends are and what they're seeing in their municipalities. Certainly I speak with other planners and other communities, and everyone is experiencing some pressure right now and growth that was unexpected. So we really have to stay attuned to one another, particularly as things are changing quickly. So we will be doing that as part of the review, I guess.
I might just add that from an environment perspective, we are connected to Hants County because of the way the watersheds work and the sharing of watersheds, and we have been for a very long time. And I think that's becoming increasingly important to look and plan from a watershed perspective. And so I think we'll look to do that even more seriously going forward.
Great, thank you. Well, so I'm not seeing any more questions. So Shiloh, if you can move to the next slide. So if you are interested in submitting additional comments or asking us questions, we certainly encourage everybody here to get in touch with us. You can visit our website or contact us by email or by phone, and we are certainly happy to take any comments or questions through those mediums. We also have a variety of engagement tools available on Shape Your City, so please feel free to participate in those. We'd love to hear from you. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for coming to this session tonight, and thank you to our panelists for their time. Everyone have a great night. Thank you.